All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. For this interview, I couldn't be more excited to welcome someone I knew in my old New Jersey days I haven't seen for a few years, so this is really cool. Please welcome from the Garden State of New Jersey, Mr. Bob Bert. Bob, great to see you, man.
Oh, thanks, Joel. It's good to see you too.
Yeah, it's been more than a minute, so I'm really happy we were able to connect for this. And I'll tell you, man, you have one of the most extensive histories of any musician I know. And I should warn the viewer in advance, we're probably not going to get to everything because there is a lot. I think Bob has played in literally every band, so we'll have to shorten the list a little bit. But before we get into all that stuff, Bob, I want to kind of start with the most important period of time, which is always the present. I just found out recently you're working on a solo project. So let's start there. What's going on with that and what can people expect?
Well, after I was, very busy touring with Lydia Lunch and John Spencer for like 11 years. And then all of a sudden, both things came to an end. And this band, Lulu Lewis, were doing a residency at this new tiny place called the Two Bridges Luncheonette, which is in Chinatown. And it's actually run by the same guy that used to run the Continental in on Third Avenue in New York City. And so it's a small place. The opening night, Lenny Kaye opened it up, and they've been putting on all these performances there, but it's not a place for a rock band. So they asked me if I wanted to be part of it, and I just took on the challenge and said yes. And then I just started like putting together this crazy percussion thing, and and I was just and then I was also singing a bunch of cover songs as I'm playing percussion, and I just thought I was going to do it once, and it wasn't something I was actively pursuing, but I played the show, and it got such a good reception that I got two more shows out of it, and it's fun, and people are digging it, and I share a practice space slash recording studio in Hoboken with my longtime friend Mark C from Live Skull, and so it's very easy to say, hey, let's as long as I'm doing this, like, yeah, let's record it. So we laid down some tracks, and I'm gonna, I have no deadline or no big goals. It's gonna be my little thing that I'm gonna do until until another band comes along, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, it's kind of fun. And that's that's about it.
That's very cool. Do you have a general sense as to when this stuff might be released? Are you at that point yet?
Oh no, not at all. In fact, I'm just at the framework of the recording, and there'll probably be things added, and like I said, it's going to be casual. I'm not going to like go in there for like a week or anything like that. It's going to be days here and there, and whenever I feel it's satisfying enough and good enough for someone else to hear it, then I'll see who, if anyone will put it out, but it's cool because now if someone offers me a show locally, I could do it, so
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing it for sure.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Um, Now to kind of go back to this more of the start of things. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I know you've been really a fixture, of the at least the New York, New Jersey scene for decades and decades now. Um, so let's kind of start there because from what I understand, you were really in the mix of things and attending shows in New York really at the start of what, is now kind of the iconic 70s era of New York, right? You were going to CBGB's pretty early on, right?
I discovered CBGBs in 75. I was I kind of grew up in the 60s, and I was like 14 in 1969. I started, you know, taking drugs and experimenting and, being a hippie, and but I was always into music. I'm one of those people, like, pretty much. I'm reading this book now, called "If We Built the Stage, Can We Play?" And it's really great. It's a very volume. There's 4 volumes of it. I actually have a chapter in the second volume, but the first volume that I'm reading now is all, like, all about the Magic Tramps and the beginning of the Dolls and that whole scene. And pretty much any person around my age group is going to say the same thing, how seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in 1963 or 4, I was like 7 or 8. That's just like, it's hard to imagine now, like, what an impact that had on everybody. And pretty much, you talk to Clem Burke or anybody, they're just like, that's what started them, wanting to play. And so, I when I was 12 years old, I took a year full of drum lessons. And then once I moved out of my house at 18, I mean, I always bought records and I always went to shows. I started going to shows when I was 14. And I grew up in Clifton, New Jersey, which was right next to Passaic, New Jersey, which had 3 old porn theaters that had concerts. And at one of them, I saw, the Alice Cooper "Love It to Death" tour, which I'm wearing the T-shirt right now. And the other, and it was like the Montauk Theater, the Central Theater, and I saw Pink Floyd do Ummagumma tour at the other theater, and then the Capitol Theater opened, and my very first date was opening night of the Capitol Theater, which was the Jay Giles Band and Humble Pie. And and then while I was in high school, I hope you don't mind, I'm just blabbing away here.
Oh no, please, this is fascinating. Really.
So when I was in high school, um, those are the years where Ziggy Stardust came out and Transformer, and I started, like, you know getting going in that direction a little bit. And then I started going to clubs. I went to Max's to see the New York Dolls in like 1973. And so I started going to see them at a bunch of different places. And then, and I saw, like, the Stilettos and the Harlots of 42nd Street, all those bands. And so then, yeah, and the one band that me and my friends used to go see every chance we could was Wayne County and the Backstreet Boys, because they were just so over the top and hilarious and offensive. And we must have saw them about 10 times. Mark Bell was on drums, and they were just such a great band. And but I also was going to see jazz. We go see Ross on Roland Kirk and Sun Ra. I saw Sonny Rollins play in a loft, and Don Cherry I saw, and also we used to go see that guy Brother Theodore.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it was just so great, because even back then you would get the Village Voice and you would open up and you just plan your whole week out. So one night, my friend, I had like my best friend in high school. He was the first person I knew that had his own apartment. So we would always be hanging out over there. So, we were getting into all the, the beat stuff, and just, discovering all this stuff. And he said, "Hey, let's go check out this CBGB place. It's like, this woman, Patti Smith, is there." And so we went there. It was like a weeknight, and there's like 20 people there tops, and it was Patti Smith and television.
Mm.
And they weren't even that, like, mind-blowingly great, but I just knew, like, I just said, like, this is my world. And I just started going there like 4 times a week, and Max's, and just seeing. I saw the beginning shows of all those bands. I mean, I saw the Heartbreakers with Richard Hell probably 5 times, and yeah, so that was like, and through that whole time, being a musician was the farthest thing from my mind. So I was like, I was fascinated and obsessed with the whole Andy Warhol scene. And so I went to after floundering around a little bit, I went to take classes at the School of Visual Arts, and I learned how to be a silkscreen printer. And so I became a fine art silkscreen printer, and I moved into Manhattan in like 78. And I ended up having a job printing Warhol's artwork.
Mm.
And so that was like during the 80s through Sonic Youth and Pussy Galore. And so, yeah, that's what I was doing. And then, all right, make a long story long. I was, I was like the thought of being I was going to see all these shows, and I'd never had any thought at all about doing music. I was just doing artwork. And then while I was silkscreen print, I had a job in Soho, silkscreen printing artwork, and it was great to be there at that time. Like you'd have a lunch break, you'd smoke a joint, you'd go see the Robert Rauschenberg show, and then you go to like the four record stores, and you were like, I was like so on top of everything that was like going on. And one day while I was working, this girl that I work with came in and showed me the No New York compilation. I was like, wow, and I was immediately like intrigued and bought it, and then it was that point in time where I kind of realized that you don't have to be technically amazing. You could just like have a great concept and just be creative and so okay. So also while I was working at that same place, I saw a small ad on the back page of the Village Voice. It said punk rock punk rock art wanted for a show. So I went to the gallery, which is right down the block on Wooster Street, and I showed him some work. And it was this like crazy African American guy, all coked up, and he had this art gallery, and he looked at my work, and he was just like, "Man, I love this. You're going to be in the show, and it's like Joey Ramone, and all these people are going to be in the show, blah 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 blah." And at that point, I was like thrilled. I was just like, because I didn't know anyone. I was just a Jersey kid going to all these shows and just not knowing anybody. But so yeah, I got into this group show, which actually it was great. It had giant painting by Screaming Mad George, and Joey Ramone had a piece called Bloody Gums, which was a toothbrush painted red, and he had it glued on the ceiling. Um, and the opening was just crazy. Like the whole punk rock world was there, and I was just like standing there, like somebody rode a motorcycle into the gallery, and so I ended up staying a part of that gallery and being in a couple other group shows and stuff. And that's where I met my future wife, Linda, who, so, we met, and our first date was actually January 1st, 1980. And so we were dating, and I was living in Manhattan. She was living in Jersey City. After a year, we decided we wanted to live together, and I didn't want to go to Jersey City. She didn't want to come to New York, so we compromised. She goes, "Let's go to Hoboken." And that's like, so I went here and checked it out, and I went saw some show at Maxwell. I was like, "Yeah, this is a cool place to live." So we got an apartment on the nicest block in town for $500 a month. And back then it like was like that's kind of steep. I don't know. And that same apartment now is probably like 5,000 a month or something.
Yeah, exactly. So your entry point to being a performer on stage, would that have been drunk driving with Peter Missing?
Yes. So after we moved to Hoboken, and then we were always going to shows. I spent more than half my life at Maxwell's, and it's the one of the greatest clubs in the world, no doubt. And but this one night we went to see a show at there's another place called the Beaten Path Cafe, and it was on Washington Street. I'm not sure what it is now, but it's long gone. And it had kind of more of a hippie vibe to it, but they had shows there. So one night, I actually saw Johnny Thunders play there, and I saw the Gun Club when Kid was in the band. They played there too, and so we went there one night just to see some friends play, and one of the bands didn't show up, and we were sitting there drinking, and someone said, "Hey, does anyone play the drums?" And Linda's like, "Yeah, Bob does." So I go up there, and it was me and Peter Missing, who was like just like reading some poetry, and this guy Jeff called himself Jeff Holiday, and we just made a bunch of noise and played and whatever. And there was this guy there. His name was Pat Clark, and he used to live above Maxwell's, and he was like on the scene. He was responsible for always bringing the fall to Hoboken, and so he was booking shows, and he liked us, and offered us a bunch of shows. So we became a band. Yeah, from there we started playing some shows, and I mean, we weren't very good, and we were kind of more like influenced by Flipper than all the pop stuff that was going on in Hoboken at the time. And Peter Missing, he was the troublemaker, and he's like banned from a lot of places, and it was kind of, it was crazy, but the thrill of playing, and then people on the street coming up to you and say, "Hey, I saw you." It was just like, this is much more fun than sitting in a room painting by myself. So I just never stopped. That was the start of it, but I never stopped.
Now, Sonic Youth had been around for a bit before you joined. I know they did the first EP with Richard Edson
Right.
on drums, the actor. I think most people would know him from Platoon, actually. But he was the original drummer, did the first EP. Um, how did your entry come about into Sonic Youth?
It's pretty funny because, well, I was aware of Sonic Youth because I read the New York Rocker, and I saw an article in there that said Glenn Branca was starting a record label, and Sonic Youth were going to be his first release. So I was still working in Soho. I saw the Sonic Youth record. I bought it. I really liked it. And then I went to see them play at the Mud Club with Richard Edson and at CBGB's. And and it was kind of weird because back then they were still finding their way, and they were doing all this weird stuff with guitars, but they were taking like, seemed like a year and a half in between songs, like picking out their guitar and fiddling around with it. And Richard Edson would be sitting there like, "Come on, man, let's go." And so yeah, so but I still really dug them. And then one day I walked into Rocks in Your Head on Prince Street, and there was a flyer on the wall that said Sonic Youth needs a drummer. So I took it down and I called them up, and it just came out in Thurston's book how he had made like 30 of those flyers, and he put them up all over the city in record stores and on poles, and I was the only one to call. So that was that. Yeah, I went and met him and played with him, and next thing you know, I was on tour in a van with the Swans and Sonic Youth.
Well, when that tour happened, the Sonic Youth Swans tour, this would have been the incarnation of Swans with Gerard, Norman,
No,
and Kane.
oh,
No?
before Norman, it was Gerard, Sue Hannell, Harry Crosby, Rowley. Yeah, I think that was it.
Wow, wow, wow. Certainly the Swans of 2024 are a vastly different band, sonically and personnel wise, to what they were doing during that tour. When I think of the early Swans output, um, still nothing compares to it. It's like a volcano erupting.
Oh, and live, it was just insane because here was two bands that only had one EP out, and we go on this tour down south where nobody knows who we are. And even when there was three people in the room, the Swans, you could just feel it through your whole body. The volume was just so intense. And Sue Hannell, it's really a shame that her guitar playing with Swans never got documented because she had nothing in common with Norman at all. Lee Ronaldo used to compare Sue Hannell's guitar playing to rhinoceroses fucking or something like that. It was crazy. And then, we were like 10 people in a van with no seats with a U-Haul with the equipment. I was the only one that didn't smoke cigarettes. It was like insane. And the Swans would be like fighting with each other, like throwing punches over it. It's amazing that I stuck to this after that tour.
Well, there are a couple of things out there with Sue and Swans. I think there's that, what is it called? Body to body, job to job, that early live stuff
Uh-huh.
Gerard put out. I think she's on one
Yeah,
of the tracks.
it could be.
But I have to ask you, and I know it's the question that you probably get quite often, and there's all kinds of forums online asking this question. Has there been a sign of Sue Hannell at all in recent years?
Yeah, well, there's this weird thing because there wasn't forever, but then this thing popped up that someone discovered, and it was really horrible. It was like it said Susan Hannell, and she was in Columbus, South Carolina, and she was in jail because she was driving and she like hit some guy on a motorcycle and killed him and didn't even realize it and then went home. And when the cops came to her home, she right off the bat said that she was on methadone and Valium, and she didn't have a driver's license or any. She was so she's in prison right now. If this is really the Sue Hannell, and they had a picture, and I knew I said that's definitely her,
Mm.
and like she was like, looking back on it, I just think she was always an addict because she was very strange. I first met her before Swans because she worked with my wife. She was just like a receptionist at where my wife worked, and she was just like right off the bus, like Midwestern girl, like really normal and and uh and then she's joined the Swans, and all of a sudden she like 80 pounds and always in black, just like, and she got really strange. She played the first time that Bewitched played live was me and her, and so I was hanging with her all, and she was like drinking cough syrup, and so when we were rehearsing for that show, I went over to her apartment, which was like on Second Avenue, and she had lived there for like 8 years or something, and I couldn't believe it. There wasn't one thing in there. There was a folding chair and a giant poster of Motorhead on the wall, and just wooden floors, and there was a boom box. And I'm like, well, Sue, like, where's your bed? Where do you sleep? And she just opened a closet and showed me a sleeping bag. So I I'm just guessing this, but I'm thinking that speed was the drug of her choice. So, but yeah, she like just disappeared forever. No one knew anything. And just like last year, this news article popped up and was going around.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah. But like no one knew anything about her. It's like in the Swans book, Thurston referred to her as a lesbian, but I never saw her with anyone, male or female. And when she was hanging out with my wife, she would always say, "Oh, that guy's really cute" and stuff. So I don't think she was a lesbian. I just think she was like in outer space.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Not that there's anything wrong with being a lesbian. I'm just saying she was just so like asexual. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What a shame. What a shame.
Yeah. It is. It's one of those sad things that it was just amazing though how she was able to just disappear.
Yeah, you'd figure in the age of the internet. Well, I guess perhaps the internet caught up with her eventually.
Right, but she was probably so out of it forever. She probably never got clean. I mean, this picture of her They said she was 70, but she looked like she was like, right out of the crypt. She had her hair dyed jet black, and I could tell it was her, through all the weirdness and wrinkles and everything. I could tell it was her.
Mm. Um, as far as Sonic Youth, there were a couple of ins and outs with you and Sonic Youth. Uh,
Yes,
they let you go at one point. They brought in Jim Sclavunos, who's now in the Bad Seeds.
who's
For
been in every band in the world?
Yeah,
You say,
yeah,
you think I've been in every band in the world? Sclavunos? Forget it.
yeah, the Cramps and God knows who else.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so he does the album Confusion is Sex. You come back and a bit further down the line, Sonic Youth puts out what is still my favorite album from the band, Bad Moon Rising. And I want to get your perspective on something. I'm going to put my certified rock critic hat on for a moment,
Uh,
um, because when I compare those two albums, I was listening to Confusion is Sex today, actually. And I love the album. It's a great record, but it's a very disjointed record. And what I mean by that is, to my ears, it sounds like some jigsaw pieces that are kind of spread out. Whereas, I mean, they're all great ideas, but they're ideas just sort of put in different spots.
right.
Whereas Bad Moon Rising is a far more cohesive record. Sonically, the way that record sounds is still very strong. I think Martin Beasy did that with you guys, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, and even the start of that record, the intro going into Brave Men Run, very clearly a different Sonic Youth at that point. Um, so I'm wondering, was that progression intentional, or was it just a matter of a band kind of growing into its own? The
Well,
more you,
let's talk about the ins and outs of me. And so when we did what was called the Savage Blunder tour, and it was in two parts. After the first, it took us a while to figure this out because with I was Thurston was we were going back and forth with Thurston when he was writing his book because we couldn't figure out like this is what happened. So they fired me after the first leg of the tour, and then they played a show at the Mud Club with this guy Tom Retchian, and then I guess he couldn't go on tour, so they were stuck in a position. So they called me, and I did the second half of the tour, which is after looking back on it now, I was like, that was pretty damn nice of me. They fired me, and I came back and did that, and so yeah, so I did that, and then after that, they got Sclavunos, and I went to see them the couple of shows because before Sclavunos, the whole Confusion is Sex album, I was with them. I was writing all those songs with them, and I had a totally different approach. And you could hear it. There's a CD that came out that through Steve Shelley's label. It was like Live in Venlo '83, and on that CD, it's kind of a crude CD, but it's pretty cool. But that if you listen to that CD, you would hear what my approach to those songs were, which were much more like minimal and thumpy and different. Jim was very light, and I didn't, he I don't think he worked well with Sonic Youth, and he only did like two shows with them. And then there was weirdness because he was married to Truce LeGroot, who was in a band Plus Instruments with Lee. So I don't know what the deal was, but anyway, Sclavunos split. And so one day I was working at my father's liquor store and I get this call from Thurston and he's like, hey man, yeah, we wanted to try out Jim, but you want to know if you want to, try again. And in that interval that Jim was with them, um, I was playing with Karen Cool and Alice Janice here in Hoboken. It was like the beginning of Gut Bank, but before it got to that point. But I was practicing all the time, and my drumming got a lot better. And so and so and getting back to Confusion is Sex, I was going to see them play with Jim, and one night after one of the shows, I said to Lee, and maybe Lee and Thurston, I said, "Yeah, that was good, but my approach to making the nature scene is way cooler than his." So they let me come in and record that song, which I did in one take with these really fat drumsticks, and Wart and Tears had to change out the drum heads after that one take. And so yeah, so I went back and I rehearsed with them, and they were impressed on how much better I got. So they had this show coming up at this festival at the White Columns Gallery called the Speed Trials, which was a week of shows in a small art gallery, and it was like 1983, I guess, and the Swans were on the bill, and the Beastie Boys, and the Fall, and Lydia Lunch, and it was a great group of shows. So I played that show with Sonic Youth, and after we played, we went to the bar across the street, and as it turned out, and that was actually that night at Speed Trials was the night that I was handed a copy of Confusion is Sex, which I was thrilled because that was like my recording debut. And then of course I bring it home and I pull out the insert and they had my name spelled wrong. But so I went to this bar with them after the show, and um, as it turned out, Lee and Thurston were flying out the next day to tour Europe with Glenn Branca. And while they were there, they were setting up the first Sonic Youth European tour. So they asked me if I would go to Europe, and I just said, well, you have to promise me that it's not going to cost me a penny, and you're not going to fire me when we get back. And they were like, cool. So yeah, I rejoined, um, stuck with them, for 90 shows. We recorded the Kill Your Idols EP, and then then Bad Moon Rising, which is amazing. Is that it's the very first full album I ever played on. People are still buying it today. It's just really amazing.
Well, as I said, there was a more, at least to my ears, a bit more of a streamlined approach, perhaps, to some of that songwriting. Um, like I said, I love the previous album, um, but it's kind of like if I was to throw a Swans comparison into it, it's kind of like Cop versus Children of God. Like there's a difference there.
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of
But
how yeah.
I think the reason is because of all that, drummer changing and stuff during Confusion. And supposedly the sessions were crazy. Somebody spilled soda on the master tape or whatever. And Bad Moon Rising was kind of composed like the way it is. And we played a few shows from start to finish of what you hear on a record, and before we actually went into the studio. So it was kind of like mapped out. And then of course, it's just like, yeah, we were one of the first bands to know of we heard about Martin Bisi because he had recorded like Herbie Hancock's Rocket and stuff like that, and all the Africa Bambaataa and all this stuff. And and then yeah, I don't know who decided that we should go there. And we went out there. Back then Gowanus was like, there was like packs of wild dogs running around. Now it's like Whole Foods, and but
Yeah.
Martin's still there, so that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And brilliant uh uh engineer and performer in his own right. His solo stuff is really good. Um but to kind of move the Sonic Youth thing a bit further, I guess the one show that you probably get asked most about to this day during your incarnation of the band was when Sonic Youth played the Mojave Desert.
That was probably the most coolest show I've ever played in my life. Yeah. And
And that
now it's you've seen the film, I assume, right?
mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
it
so
seems
great that it
like a
was
very
documented.
yeah, it seemed like a very how do I say um acid drenched crowd, perhaps? Is that
That
accurate to
was,
say?
yeah, that was, it was so weird because, you know, for me, it was like when we came in and we found out that everyone was tripping, I was just like, this is 1985, really? People are still doing this stuff, and of course, what did I know? They're still doing it today.
Well, looking at the next chapter of Sonic Youth, that was Evil, Sister, and then bam, Daydream Nation comes out. Um, Evil was, of course, Steve Shelley on drums, but that was when, I think historically things started kind of build for Sonic Youth, and Bad Moon Rising was kind of the first indicator that maybe something was going to go beyond being
Yeah,
a noise
yeah,
band.
so it's like it's so weird because there was a period there where when Sonic Youth was getting big, where people were looking at me like, "Why'd you quit? Why'd you quit? Like you Pete Best or whatever." And but it's just like Sonic Youth didn't get big until like a good 5 or 6 years after I was out of there, and who could ever foresee that? Like I would have imagined in my wildest dreams that, oh, in a few years there's going to be this thing called 120 minutes and alternative music and the way the whole thing blew up. And I would have never, we were like a noisy East Village band. And when we were over in doing the last tour we did of England, which was opening for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds on their first tour, which my show is out now out on the Record Walls Have Ears, which is doing really well, and I'm very happy about that. But yeah, like Paul Smith from Blast First, he just kept saying, "I'm gonna make you as big as the birthday party." It's like, and we were just like looking at him like, huh? So yeah, who would have thought? Whatever.
So was that the Bad Seeds era when Hugo Race was still on guitar?
No, Roland Howard was on guitar for that tour.
Oh wow.
It was great. It was like they finished every night. They did Wild World and I think Jennifer's Veil for an encore.
Unreal. Unreal.
Yeah.
I never got to see Roland live, but man,
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
I saw These Immortal Souls when they were here a couple times. Yeah.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
great.
Um, I just recently, in the last couple weeks, had Lenny Splendorio from Buy Our Records.
Oh,
Uh, we did an interview, and we were talking about
I guess the
some
first
of
time I've ever heard his last name said.
I practiced it too before I recorded. But we were talking about, some of the key releases on Buy Our Records, and obviously we got into Pussy Galore, Pussy Gold 5000, which kind of brings us to the next topic of conversation, because you relatively quickly after Sonic Youth, your time with them was over, you hook up with John and Julia and
Right.
join Pussy Galore, who I guess had just moved up from DC. Is that how things
They
went?
moved up from DC and I went to this show at the Cat Club to see Nice Thursday Neubauten, and it was
Mhm.
a real late night show, and I was hanging out with Kim and Thurston, and I said to them like, "Yeah, I'm kind of getting itchy to play. Do you know anybody?" And they said, "Well, this band just moved to town called Pussy Galore," and they were standing right 10 feet away. So I went over and I saw these kids. They're all like, I think John was 20 and Christina was like 19 when I met her. And then, it was funny because they were like these young kids. They had like brand new black leather jackets on and their hair was all dyed black. And so I went and I introduced myself and talked to them. And then about a week later, I was standing out by CBGB and Pussy Galore had just put out themselves the Groovy Hate Fuck EP. So John came over and handed it to me, and I said, "Are you guys looking for a drummer?" And he wrote his number and called him up, and that was that. The first couple of rehearsals, I was just playing real drums and they had someone else banging on metal. And then one day John said, let's combine the two. And so we went to actually, back then there was actually a junkyard in Hoboken. Hard to imagine now. But yeah, we put that crazy kit together and then we just, started going. The first thing I think the first thing we did was like, I remember John saying to me, because like at the time, Sonic Youth was mouthing off about recording the Beatles' White Album to the press, and I was still in the band, and I remember we got through like back in the USSR at one rehearsal, and then we just like kind of forgot about it, and then like so John approached me and he said like I'm thinking about doing Exile on Main Street, and I was just like that's a great idea, and it's to me a better record, so let's like do it, and then so we got this like beat up 8-track cassette recorder, and that's right when Neil Haggerty came up and to join us, and it was the five of us, and we were in this like empty classroom somewhere, and yeah, we would just like listen to a few songs, tackle a few songs. I mean, it couldn't have been done without Neil, because Neil could listen to a guitar player and he could come up with it in 2 seconds. But so we made that cassette, which got a lot of attention, and then we signed to Caroline, and then we recorded Right Now, and
Right.
goes on and on.
Right. And of course, you did that one off with By Our Records.
Right. Yeah. Getting back to Lenny. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that was yeah. We did Exile on Main Street, and then Pussy Gold 5,000,
mm,
and yeah. So yeah, we recorded that at War and Tears. It was just like 4 or 5 songs, and By Our Records put it out. And the greatest thing ever was that Lenny got us on the Uncle Floyd show. So I mean, that's a that's almost as good as playing in the desert.
that's right. Well, I mean, you mentioned that Exile on Main Street cassette, and here's my certified rock critic hat coming back on for a minute. Um, Pussy Galore had that reputation, which I learned about after the fact because I was a little too young to listen to it when it was happening. But it was always, oh, they're tuneless cacophony and all this. I would counter that and say Pussy Galore was a band of actual musicians for the most part. I think I listened to an interview with Julie not too long ago. She mentioned being a total novice in the beginning, but generally speaking, when you look at your post Pussy Galore work, the Blues Explosion, what Neil did with Royal Trucks, even those Drag City records, very musical albums. Boss Hogg eventually put out Whiteout, like the greatest album Garbage never put out. So there was a lot of musicality in that band, and it was obvious individually, you all went on to do different things, and some of the members went on to do, I guess, in hindsight, were, fairly conventional things too. Um, so you guys could play, you were musicians. Um, and there was alternative music kind of busting out at that time. Husker Du had signed to a
and we rehearsed like crazy. And if you listen to any of those live shows we did on those European tours, or even the very last show we did, which came out at Live in the Red at CBGB's, just like one song after another. Our sets had like 30 songs. Yeah, some of them were 40 seconds long, but we were so tight.
Mm,
It was noisy, squealy,
mhm.
no bass, metal percussion, but and that's why they're kind of Pussy Galore is kind of a the people that love us really love us, and other people were like, "What the fuck is this?"
Well, here's where I was going with a question. Obviously 88 REM's getting big. There's a potential to kind of, I don't want to say commercialize alternative music, but there were opportunities there. Um, why did Pussy, I mean, thank God you guys did because I love those records, but why go in the Pussy Galore direction and make it kind of hard on yourselves, whereas you could have gone in a much more conventional way where some of you ended up doing years later.
Well, it's Pussy Galore was, that was John Spencer's trip. I mean, everyone contributed, and the personalities were different. Lots of fights. People didn't get along. I was 10 years older than them, so I was like, even though I was only like 30, but there's a big difference between 20 and 30, and as far as like personality or whatever goes. And yeah, it was a lot of like, I was the one, was like, why can't everyone just get along, So yeah, it was kind of crazy, but I don't think we cared about commerciality or mainstream or anything like that. And there's no way. It's just like, I've been done in interviews and people say that to me, like, whoa, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, if I really wanted to be a successful musician, I wouldn't have been in bands like Sonic Youth and Pussy Galore.
Right.
It's just like, you know, I'd rather have street cred than a lot of money.
Right, right. Well, Pussy Galore is still cool. There's a lot of very successful records that are
Oh,
garbage,
oh yeah.
so, always go with cool. When you get an opportunity, always go with cool.
Yeah, exactly. I
Why
mean,
did
I'm really proud of the work I did with those. Those records stand up, if you like them, they stand up, like as far as like records that I've played on a hell of a lot. It's like I would say Bad Moon Rising #1 and probably Right Now #2.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Well, even that live record that came out a few years ago, the In the Red live record, that was it. That was the last show, right? Wasn't that?
That was the last show. And then uh I get a call from John. He asked me if I want to, make another record with just him and Neil. And so we recorded that La Historia de la Musica, you know, record. And it was just the three of us. And it turned out really cool. And, we were about to go to London and play. And that's when Neil just like went to San Francisco, didn't tell anybody, and left us in the lurch. So me and John actually got flown over to London for like 4 or 5 days just to do press, which was like a great paid vacation. But it's so weird. It's just like, yeah, we have this new album out. You know. So, but and if you listen to that album, you could almost hear the Elvis isms creeping into John.
Yeah, it was definitely, things were a changing, uh,
Yeah.
for sure. And I know there have been a couple of times when, different iterations of Pussy Galore have kind of reappeared briefly. I think the last time I saw you in person, I was thinking about this today, must have been 2019. You were in town playing with John, and the Hitmakers somewhere in Alston, Mass, I want to say,
Okay.
something like that. And you and I were talking, and as one does these days, I'm like, well, let's get a picture. And there's a lady standing next to us, and she says, "Oh, I'll take it for you." Great. So, we're doing our thing, and I'm thinking, I think that lady holding my phone is who I think it is. So she takes the picture, hands me the phone back, and he turned to me and go, "Do you know who that is?" I said, "Yeah, that's Julie from Pussy Galore." Um, and then it clicked. Oh, John's here, Bob's here, Julie's here. There's going to be a Pussy Galore thing tonight. So talk
Oh,
about,
you were at that show. I
yeah,
remember.
yeah. I mean,
I
talk
thought
about
the last time I
birthday
saw you
thing.
was with Lydia, but I guess this was later. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you with Lydia. That was at that VFW hall in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was later because I went to see you and John, and Julie was there, and then like the light bulb went off, like, oh, this is going to be a thing, and indeed it was. So that was awesome.
It was a spontaneous thing, but it was fun.
Yeah, totally, totally. I want to get into Bewitched a little bit because
Okay.
that, was kind of your thing. That was your project on your own steam. Um, there were two full-length albums with Bewitched
Yes.
and some EPs and things along the way.
Yeah, a few 7 inches.
And I know you had put out a compilation a few years back of some of that material. Uh,
Yeah.
and I have that record and I love it.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so Bewitched was going on kind of concurrently with Pussy Galore then initially.
Well, no, what happened was, um, so after I left Sonic Youth, Thurston was doing an interview with some British newspaper, and he made up a story that I had a new band called Bewitched with Suzanne Sasek, their sound woman, and and so I just kind of went with it. I was gonna, I made it my experimental side project, and Blast First was supposed to put it out. So I went into War and Tears, and I laid down those first two songs. Um, and I got like Dave Rick to play on it, and Mark Cunningham from Mars, and it was just like a fun thing. And then I turned it into to Blast First, and they didn't like it. So I went back in the studio and had Jim Thurwell remix it. They still didn't like it. And it was kind of one of those things where it was just like he didn't have the balls to tell me. So you just like, all of a sudden they're avoiding you and blah, blah, blah. I just like, if you don't want to put out my record, just tell me, please. So I ended up putting it out myself, but it was like right when I joined um, Pussy Galore. So I asked him if I could use their record label name, which was Shove. So yeah, the first Bewitched record says Shove on it, and then after we turned into a real band a few years later, uh, you know that's when I hooked up with Terry Tolkien on Number Six Records, and he put out all the singles in the two albums.
So, and getting into the 90s, you were, very active as well. You were with the Chrome Cranks, who did pretty well there for a bit. I know I used to see the Chrome Cranks on MTV, back in that.
Yeah, it didn't seem so at the time, but we went to Europe a bunch of times. Um, we had a great situation because Jerry Teal had that recording studio slash rehearsal space called the Funhouse on Fourth Street. So it was like our clubhouse. So but yeah, it was crazy, and yeah, we did a lot. We did a lot of touring and ended up not making money and and whatnot, and then it kind of fell apart towards the end of the '90s, and that's kind of how the Knoxville Girls came together.
Well, I definitely wanted to get into the Knoxville Girls because In a Paper Suit was my favorite album of 2001.
Holy
Uh,
cow!
I adored that record. And that whole era was when I first started seeing you play live because at the moment for this channel, I've been doing a series on a club in Newark called The Pipeline.
Right?
I've been talking to Emilio Moreo, the owner,
Okay.
and we're sharing stories and stuff because that was a big place for me. That was kind of like my CBs when I was really young.
Uh-huh.
But that closed in 98, and that coincided with me going to school at Montclair State.
Okay.
So I needed a place to go. So I started going to Maxwell's. I mean, I was already playing at CB's for years at that point. I would go see shows, but my regular place became Maxwell's. And it was kind of like perfect being college age because you had the restaurant, it wasn't just this shithole, it was an actual like decent place. You could bring a date to see a show at Maxwell's,
Yeah, because if you're going to see like a few bands, if one of them you didn't like, you went out by the jukebox, and it was like the perfect club.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time there and I saw Knoxville Girls play. And that was such a cool band. That was you and Mr. Teal, Kid Congo was in
Yeah,
the band, Jack Martin.
yeah.
um, Such a cool group, such a cool vibe. And that second album, like I said, I still adore that record.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
But that was a two record thing, and then things kind of drifted off with the Knoxville Girls, right?
Yeah, it was kind of weird because what happened was we had a show booked at some festival in Las Vegas and we had our airplane tickets and everything. And then 9/11 happened. And that's kind of when the band started. And then, then there was a time where Kid and Jerry were mad at each other. So then Kid left and I always tell the story that it's like it's just like a total coincidence because both the Chrome Cranks and the Knoxville Girls played their very last shows opening for Dead Moon, like not knowing that they were the last shows. It was like a Dead Moon curse.
Mm. Yeah, it's a shame. It was a cool group, definitely.
Yeah, and it was fun party band. We actually went on tour with Davey Allen and the Arrows, and we went on tour with the White Stripes. It was fun.
Cool. I wanted to talk about BB Gun. One thing I've always really admired about you is, you're an active musician, you're in the scene that way, but it's so clear that you're just a fan of music and you love to document things, and I do as well. So I really loved the zine that you and Linda did, BB Gun. The look of it, the way it was put together. It's one of my favorite zines of that era, that
Oh, cool.
like late 90s, early 2000s era. Um, so I want to first kind of ask you, what led to the creation of that, and what were some of your absolute favorite moments from that experience?
Well, it was just the computers were starting to come around. I wanted, to involve Linda in something, and I kind of had that, punk magazine, interview magazine, like, hey, let's do a magazine. We'll get invited to parties. We'll get a lot of free records. And the thing that I thought this is cool because I'm part of the scene, so I could do much more personal interviews. And I did get some great stuff. I mean, like Elliott Smith totally opened up to me. Michael Girard totally opened up to me. Uh, the Dead Moon people. I totally became, close, good friends with, Genesis and Lady J. And, so it was just a labor of love. We every time we put one out, we're like, that's the last time because it's a lot of work.
Mm,
And then it got a little slicker as we went along, and we tried to cover the printing costs with the advertising, and plus I was getting so much stuff in the mail. I was selling so many things to record stores and actually keeping a lot of great stuff. It's so weird. It's just like I wrote a little review about like a record. I think it was like Fela Kuti's son, and some woman contacts me the next week in the mail. I get this box of like every Fela Kuti CD, like 50 of them, like all sealed, brand new, stuff like that. And so yeah, it was cool. And I could do it while I was on tour. I got that great picture of the Muffs with Dee Dee Ramone and that, those interviews. And so as it went along, it got slicker and slicker. And the Vincent Gallo interview, which was dealing with him, was one thing, and then that was our best-selling issue,
mm.
and so we reprinted it again, and so I think we ended up selling like 5,000 of them, and then so when it came to the last issue, which was the one with Genesis Peorage on the cover, I think we printed up 5,000, and that wasn't as easy to get rid of. I think I still have like maybe 20 of them, but I had boxes of them for a long time. In fact, I think I even gave Genesis a box or two.
Yeah, you were kind enough to give me one years ago, which I still
Oh,
have
cool.
here. I loved that interview with Jen. I mean, I interviewed Jen years later. Um, and that was epic. I have like hours of audio from that conversation. Um, Obviously, I would say an interesting person, but an interesting couple of people, right, Jen? Um, Did you know Jim prior to that interview taking place?
It was weird because I um I did not know Genesis, and I was actually, to be honest with you, I was afraid. I did because I wasn't afraid, I just thought like I'm not knowledgeable enough to be interviewing. And so I asked Jack Sargent to do it for me, but he was in Australia and he could only do 20 minutes on a phone or something. So one night I was out and I ran into to because I guess Genesis was probably getting some facial work done or something. She was in the hospital, and I sent her a couple of BB guns, and she loved them. Like, and so she said, yeah, yeah, we definitely want to do it. And then I ran into them, which is where I took that great picture of them against that gated thing, and then they said, no, you should do it, you should do it, and they invited me over there, and they were just so generous, and it was weird because that was kind of like I think I was the first publication to kind of document the whole experiment they were doing. And
Mhm.
so that was kind of crazy. And Genesis was just so generous, just giving me all these things. I left there with so much stuff. And we were talking about like the whole, did the Rolling Stones kill Brian Jones thing? And Genesis was telling me about, yeah, because Brian Jones was just starting up this new band with Jimi Hendrix and the singer from Manfred Mann. And then she gets up in the room and comes back with a burned CD of the session. It's just like, whoa. And then and then even after it was done, and that's right when they were starting to play again. It was like 2004.
Mhm.
They were starting to play again. And I was, like I said earlier, I knew Alice forever, the bass player, because I went when I met her when I first came to Hoboken. I went to her 21st birthday party. Um, so so yeah, and then they played their first few shows, and yeah, no, it was kind of exciting because for it to come out right then, and they had all the magazines at their shows and stuff like that. So, and even after the magazine came out, there was a few times I, you know, was around them, and then one day I go to my PO box and he sent me the Throbbing Gristle re-release of the CDs, the 24 CDs or whatever. It
Hmm.
was like, something that sold for like $100. And I was like, you got it for free. So she was great. And the other crazy, the other bizarre interview was, definitely Vincent Gallo. Because one of the things was like, in order to interview Vincent Gallo, he has to be on the cover of the magazine. So, I'm working it out with him, and I said, well, so he goes, okay, I'm going to get my own photographer, and I said, well, if you want, I could ask Richard Kern or Michael Laverne to do it, Michael Levine, and Vincent was like, yeah, Richard would be great. So, Richard comes to the interview, and the interview was, all you have to do is read the interview to see how crazy it was. He's like, we're in Odessa rest diner, and Vincent's talking about the movie that Christina Ricci made after Buffalo 66, and it was called The Opposite of Sex. And Vincent's like, yeah, she wouldn't do any press for my movie. And then she made that faggot movie, that fucking fag movie, blah, blah, blah. I'm like sliding down in my seat, cringing. It's like, and so anyway, I at the end of the interview, I asked him, I said, okay, we'll send you a contact sheet. You could pick out whatever picture you want for the cover. And he's like, no, no, I trust you guys. I trust you guys. So, pick out a cover, pick out a picture for the cover, print it up. The magazine's printed up. I send Vincent Gallo 25 copies of the magazine. I don't hear anything back from him. So finally, I email him. I say, hey, did you receive the package of magazines I sent you? And he just writes back one sentence. Did you have to use the worst photo of me possible on the cover? And then he's like, meanwhile, he took the 25 magazines I sent him, he signs them and puts them on his website for like $100 a piece or whatever. And so we actually, when we did the second pressing of that issue, we put a different cover on it, one that he liked, which was one that Richard took in black and white with like a Instamatic or something.
Yeah, yeah. It's those kind of stories that only people who produce this kind of work know. Like, after so many years, you know who's cool, who's a total freak, But it's
But I have to say, I never laughed so hard in my life. He really had me in stitches.
interesting. Well, you mentioned earlier on, you mentioned Wayne County, and it's kind of funny because it kind of ties into a few different things. This had to have been maybe 2002. I was playing with Bobby Steele in the Undead at the time, one of my stints in the Undead, and we opened for Jane County,
Mhm.
and Jane had at least one, maybe two people from the Electric Chairs in the band that night. So it was kind of a big deal, you know. So we're playing the Undead. I look out in the audience and I see this very androgynous, fairly short, um, still somewhat male presenting individual in the crowd. And I'm like, is that fucking Genesis Peorage? And then Jen smiles when you see those like gold teeth. I'm like, it's Genesis Peorage. And then I look over and there's Jackie. So I'm like, well, of course Jen's gonna be at the Jane County show, right? Um, but yeah, Jen was a fascinating interviewee. Um, we didn't get into what you would expect. We got into about how cool Hawkwind and Funkadelic are.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, and that's the kind of conversations you love to have with someone.
Yeah. Genesis is one of the few people I know that's into the incredible string band,
Mm.
which is, I've always loved, and I saw them at the Fillmore East when I was a kid.
And so BB Gun had a great run, and years later, in more recent times, you did put out a book as well. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to read it and check it out yet. Um, but first of all, there's going to be a second printing of that book soon, right?
There's already been a second printing. We're hoping for a third.
Okay.
I just contacted Todd recently because, you know, so many people keep asking for it, and each like the first edition and the second edition. The second edition had added stuff, and the third edition I'm gonna put this Richard Hell interview in there that I did, some different photos and stuff. He's just been cranking out so many books, but he said he's going to try to do it this year, and I really hope he does because it just seems as time goes on, it's just and with all Thurston's book and Walls Have Ears and Bad Moon Rising getting all this press all over again, and it's just it just seems like my clout has gone up for some reason, and I told him, I said, you'll have no problem selling them, and I would like to have them to sell things that I do.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll be this year.
Excellent. Excellent. That'd be great.
Mm.
We haven't touched on Lydia yet, so we got to get into Lydia.
Oh boy.
And I did see you with Retrovirus. That was one of her many bands, I guess the most recent sort of live thing she was doing with a band. That was yourself, Weasel, Walter, Tyndall. And that went on for quite a few years, right? You guys were a pretty
Oh,
steadily working band.
11. Yeah, 11 years.
11 years. Um, Obviously your history with Lydia goes back way back to,
Yes.
the early 80s. Um, and I
Late
saw
late
Retrovirus.
70s.
Yeah, and Retrovirus, that was one of the greatest shows ever. It was brutally hot in his VFW hall.
Yeah, I didn't like that show at all. It was like a steam bath, and I don't know. I've always had weird relationship with shows in Boston.
You and me both. But it was great. I mean, Lydia is still very much Lydia. I mean, the walls were sweating. I was uncomfortable, and you would never know it by watching her that there was any kind of oppressive heat of any nature. It was like a bullet between the eyes, that show.
Yeah.
Um, and Retrovirus, I understand, is done at this point. Why did she put a cap on it after?
It's a long story and it has to do with some interrelationships in the band. But like towards the end, um, there was a bunch of shows I didn't do towards the end because I was busy with John Spencer. And but yeah, it came to an end. And I'm actually glad it did because I hated seeing them play without me. But yeah, some things just come to an end, and it's actually probably the longest band Lydia ever had.
Mm,
And it was great. It was really a great experience. I've been such a big fan even before I knew her, and so and she's just the most incredible person I've ever met in my life. And it was so much fun. And I got to go so many places where I've never been before. Like I'd never toured Australia, and we went there 3 times, played in Tasmania. We went to, Brazil, Colombia. We even played in Moscow. So it's just like it was great. And I never had so much fun because it was like a full on sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of band. It was pretty crazy,
well,
but it
Lydia.
was so good.
Well, I mean, Lydia obviously has a body of work that encompasses, various mediums. It's not just music. It's obviously
No, no,
acting and it's books and
yeah.
um. But musically speaking, I've always been fascinated with Lydia. I was listening to 1313 today, which I listen to often at work, actually. I work
Yeah.
from home, so I can just blare it. And
Do
that
you have the Weasel Walter remaster?
I don't think I do, no.
You should get it. It's like listening to a brand new album.
Ooh,
It's so good. He really,
ooh.
he really brought. Not that it needed to be brought to life, but he just like, oh man, so much better.
I gotta check that out because I adore that record. And Lydia, a lot of Lydia's music, I mean, you played a lot of it, so you know better than I do. It's not of any time. Like you can't listen to 1313 and say, oh, that's a record from 1980, whatever. I mean,
Right.
it's like it's still not in place with anything.
The same with Queen of Siam and all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. She's crosses a lot of genres, and I'm a big fan. In fact, Lydia used to introduce me to people as like Bob has seen me live more than any other person because from Eight Eyed Spy on anytime she did anything in New York, I saw her very first spoken word pieces, plays, everything. And plus at that point we were hanging out in her loft when she was, still with Jim Thurwell and but it's true. And I could listen to any Lydia record, even like some one-off thing, and enjoy it. And she like had that way of doing different types of music that like you could say the same thing for like Lou Reed or David Bowie, but they made some shitty records. And of course they've made some, fucking timeless masterpieces, but like I could listen to any Lydia. It's not often like I could come home from a tour and still want to listen to that person.
Yeah, right. I I can imagine. One thing I'm curious to ask you because you'd be the best person to ask. Um, when you look at kind of like from no wave up to the end of Pussy Galore, like that whole era. A lot of great bands came and went in New York. And there are certainly plenty of people who, um, earned the attention and we still talk about today. The Jim Thurwells, the Gerards, the Loswells, people like that. Um, and a lot of it's very well documented. Even the no wave stuff is very, written about and explored. Who are some people you feel were fantastic who maybe fell through the cracks at a point where even people who are kind of switched on, you know, may have missed that might be worth looking back and investigating from that era?
I don't think there was anything that hidden because, like in the Sonic Youth era, it was Swan, Sonic Youth, Live Skull, Rat Radar, and they're all you could find any of them today, and they and now Live Skull, okay, only one original member, but Live Skull's just made 3 albums in recent years, and they're back and as good as ever.
Mm.
And as far as it's kind of funny because when I was in those scenes, like when I was in Sonic Youth, Swans were like our partners, but I just thought we were better than everyone else. I just thought what we were doing was more interesting. And when I was in Pussy Galore, I liked us better than the Unsane, Cop Shoot Cop, all those bands that were around then. And some of those bands I'm just like I'm going back to now because sometimes you know a lot of things like even like through the like the early punk days, like I avoided the Dictators for so long, all because of that fight between Wayne County and Dick Manitoba. And then when we go in the '90s or whatever, I was just like, man, these songs are great. So, and now I'm like, I just wrote Andy Chernoff a fan letter the other day after reading his chapter in that book. So.
Yeah, they're cool guys. I think Richard's a sweetheart,
Yeah.
honestly. And I've interviewed Ross and Andy. Cool guys, great band. Um, I wanted to ask you this too, Bob, because I a couple years ago I was down on the Bowery to see a show at Jesse Mallin's place, the Bowery Electric.
I, I love that place. I play there all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And bless Jesse for doing it and all the best to him with his health.
Yes.
Um, I'm walking down, I stopped by Varvatos, I had to go in, so I do that. I go to the Bowery Electric. There's like a freestanding ATM on the street on the Bloody Bowery. You know, um, it's a different time now. I haven't been to Hoboken since Maxwell shut down. Um, what's out there? I mean, what are your thoughts of where things are now?
Well, I mean, there's no music places in Hoboken, although James Mastro just opened up this really small club called the 608 Social Club, I think it's called. And it's very small. It's one room and he has like art shows there. But I went there to see Ivan Julian play acoustic, and that was great. So he has like a lot of things like that going on there. Mastro, he's like he's got the guitar bar, and and now White Eagle Hall in Jersey City is like a really wonderful venue, and Todd from Maxwell's is booking a lot of shows there. So I went there. I've been there a bunch of times. Um, I saw the Brian Jonestown Massacre there, and Spiritualized there, and L7 with Bikini Kill, and Mudhoney, and so many bands play there. In fact, I'm real happy today because I'm a one of my favorite bands in the world is Red Cross, and they just announced today about their new double album and their U.S. tour, and they're going to be playing at White Eagle Hall. So I'm psyched
Great.
for that. And then in September, I think Buzz is playing there with uh, Trevor Dunn,
Mm.
and and Pincus is opening up.
Oh,
So,
wow. Wow. Um, but I'll tell you what, man, it's been fantastic reconnecting with you. It's been way too long.
okay, yeah, very cool. And the other things I will maybe want to mention is the Wolfmanhattan Project, which
That's right, Nick.
yeah, with Mick Collins and Kid Congo, we made two albums. Uh, Unfortunately, we've played about 10 times in the 10 years we've been together, and it's always been local, but and everyone's schedules are so busy, but hopefully someday we're gonna like pursue that a little further. And yeah, I can't think of anything else. I know I'm forgetting something, but we covered a lot.
Yeah, we actually covered more than I thought we were going to, which is cool. You and I were talking beforehand, like we may not be able to get to this, and this, but I think we hit it pretty hard, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you,
Been a
Bob. It's
pleasure.
always great talking to you. And
And
you know,
what is this is a like a channel you have or something?
yeah, yeah. I'll send you the link. I've been doing this for a few months now,
Right.
and it's been kind of Jersey centric lately.
Oh, cool.
Got to reconnect with people I grew up with, and so there's a lot of like people I knew from the '90s scene, especially. But I knew I had to talk to you, man, because you're always someone with great stories and a great history. So I appreciate you coming on.
Come to New Jersey is, John Bon Jovi and then me.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Perfect combination. Bob, it's always a pleasure, my friend.
Okay, take care, Joel.
You as well. Thank you.